But so that article kind of talks about the targeting of students who are coming and protesting and making their voices heard. They've been targeted by law firms, by different companies who put them on lists, who dox them basically for expressing their opinion, and basically, standing up for human rights and international law, and all those things that we, hope students would stand up for. So, unfortunately, the response from many of these institutions, especially when they get bullied, but what happens is when these, when these students make these statements, these protests, even protesters when they hit the streets, what's happening is I'm seeing a lot of bullying by pro-Israeli, voices that are very organized, they're well-funded, and of course they unleash, just emails and phone calls and harassment that these people in positions of authority and power basically don't want to engage and don't want to be dragged into this. So they just take the easy route out, which is targeting the individuals and groups that are not as well funded, as well organized, and they're easy to pick off. So I'm seeing a lot of this, and I've spoken to actually some people in positions of power, and they'll, off the record, they'll tell you that they are being bullied and they're afraid, and they're being pressured to make decisions that they don't want to make. And so this is very dangerous for me as a lawyer. It's important that we have a system in place, we have due process, we have structures, institutional structures that are going to stand up and defend everyone equally, not, treat certain people differently because they, not of the right color, or they don't have the right resources, they don't have the money, they don't have the backing and the clout.
Faisal, we're really at a critical time right now where we have to make some moral stances and moral decisions. Clearly, there are pressures on the Canadian institutions and government, some of them you mentioned. There is a clear Israeli lobby for the Israeli state. As such, we are at a point where we have to be really careful as well as to how and we phrase things, what we say. We used to say, we still say, occupation is a crime from BC to Palestine. And now we've seen that in Calgary, a brother got arrested for saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. We had seen sort of a momentum building up to this, which unfortunately this crisis has, or these aggressions on Palestinians have brought to the fore. Can you speculate to more around what are the pressures for the Canadian state to maintain the line that it has, to stand with Israel through and through without criticism?
Well, I think it's the fear, these people are giving in because of the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. And then that definition is unfortunately getting so broadened, and that was the subject, as I said, of the second op-ed that I wrote with Imran, was, look, the definition of anti-Semitism being expanded, so people are afraid, what do you say? So that individual who was arrested in Calgary for making that statement, river to the sea, was arrested by the police, and thank God, when the Crown got involved, they stayed the charges because they figured they couldn't really make it stick. But that, if they decide to now change the definition, if there's enough pressure and, the system goes through the process and changes these definitions and changes these laws, then, of course, could easily prosecute that person. And it's dangerous because, even the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League's definition, if you had gone on their website prior to, I think, October 26, when I had done so, the river to the sea, that term was not classified as anti-Semitic. But when they saw the momentum picking up and they saw all this, attack on the Israeli response, and they see this word used, what they did is they made a quick change. And if you go onto their website, I actually took screenshots of this to document this. So prior to that, river to the sea was not anti-Semitic. But after October 26th, if you went on the website, they changed the definition. And I have the pre and post, definitions. So, this is dangerous. Now they change that, and then that's bullying, and then they use that to bully Rashida Tlaib in the U.S. And so this is what they were trying to do here. They're trying to pressure people, change definitions on the go, and confuse people, and the people are afraid to use that term. But thank God there has been pushback as well. And what I find in this, because of all the death and destruction that people are, thankfully being able to see, I don't want to say, maybe not the right word, but I'm glad we are seeing it, that people are seeing it through social media. The mainstream media is not showing this, but because of social media and Al Jazeera and all these institutions, alternative media that is actually showing this, people are seeing this and they're pushing back. And I think it's important that we push back because these institutions cannot be bullied. Universities are being bullied. I mean, it's just shocking how universities are giving in and restricting speech. I mean, students are supposed to be discussing these things. And I realize that the lobby is very powerful and has actually thought this through, and they're targeting students because most change comes from students. I mean, the Vietnam War was stopped after students protested. Apartheid, the last place to really oppose was in the United States. Many countries had opposed it, but the United States was one of the last. And when it did pick up here, it was because of student activism. So I think the pro-Israeli lobby sees this and understands this, and that's why they're really going after students very harshly. I mean, they're doxing them. They have trucks. I've seen with my own eyes the trucks going by with, the person's picture and residence information. I mean, this is ridiculous that we're not actually, more people are not really, saying, look, whether you're pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, these kind of dirty tactics cannot be accepted. And I'm very disappointed to see that most people that I would expect to be speaking up against this are not speaking up. They're sitting there fearful. Many of them message me. I get texts. I just got a text 2 minutes ago from a professor who's pointing out all these things that is wrong, but she's afraid to say anything. She's a tenured professor. She's afraid to say it, but she's messaging me. This is to me. This is like shocking, like how people are afraid to speak. And they ask me, why am I speaking? I said, because I've spoken, on every issue. I speak out on every human rights issue, and Israel's not going to be exempted, as many people want, that country to be exempted from any kind of criticism.
Faisal, then when we try to unpack, how we're moving forward in this, so clearly there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of public outrage and support at the same time. Our institutions are certainly watching. Yet we saw, or we read recently, that the police enacted this pre-dawn raid on activists in Toronto that had smeared the Indico chapter's bookstore and called out their CEO for their complicity in what they say is their role in this ongoing genocide. On the other hand, we see that we have members of parliament in Canada who are visiting Israel at this time, as well as others who are being censured on their opposition to what's going on in their attempts to create dialogue about what's going on and being shut down. Until recently, I mean, it's been softening as such. But if we were to think ahead around how and what it would take for this nation state to become more balanced in its approach, how would you square this circle?
I think continue what we're doing. People have to not be fearful and really, come out in the streets, but also not just protest in the streets, but actually make complaints, file complaints, contact authorities, and call out the kind of double standards and the mistreatment. So that raid, for instance, that you mentioned, I mean, that's the kind of raid that people do when there's like a serious mob or gang activity or threat to people's lives, threat to, basically a threat to the very structure of our society.
Exactly. It was the largest mobilization for such a raid against what they say was human rights, hate speech is what they were trying to tag it as. It's still yet to see now how it's going to proceed further.
Yes, exactly. But what hate speech is there? This individual is supporting a foreign army by funding people who are recruited, for in Canada to go and fight for a foreign army. So what is wrong with opposing that? Yes, maybe they can be charged with vandalism or whatever, that they've broken the law, but this is not hate. I mean, that's a very big jump, and they have to prove intent, and and hopefully the defense lawyers will.
But it's extremely Orwellian, though, isn't it? And in terms of like where we're at.
Definitely. Any experts you speak on this will tell you. I mean, I've been involved in these kind of criminal situations with clients, and I'm like, wow, this is something that like a major bust, major terror ring bust or something. This is not people who protesting. Okay, so it's just there to send a message to people like, look, the state has taken a side, unfortunately, on this because of pressure. Now, I do have to give credit to the Toronto Police that they did make some statements prior to the protesting is fine, and that they're not going to be arresting people for simply protesting and using terms and all that. But this exercise, I think there was some political pressure, and I hope that does come out. And I think you have somebody from the breach, and I'm hoping that they will shed some light on some more of the investigation that they've done. But I think this is what we need to keep doing. We need to keep their feet to the fire. Everybody who does something, call it out. I mean, in the second article I mentioned that I wrote with Imran, we called out the different organizations that have not been speaking out, and some of them ended up at least making a statement now. So it's because when they get embarrassed in public and they get called out, and that's what we need to keep doing. We need to keep exposing what they're doing and the double standards and the kind of one-sided way they're acting. Call it out, and then people will see it, and then they get ashamed maybe, and then maybe they'll change their ways. And I think we need to keep this momentum going. Whatever we're doing, we need to keep doing.
So, Faisal, let's cycle back to the article titled "The Right Side of the Middle East Crisis is That of Humanity and International Humanitarian Law." Well, Canada somewhat purports to be a leader in humanitarian law, as it were, I guess. I don't know. At least maybe it's a myth. But given the situation as where we're at, and that officially has not called for a ceasefire, is abating what is happening in Gaza, in Palestine. Talk to us a little bit in these closing moments about what your article was arguing for.
Our article was arguing very, very common sense. Basically, in any other issue, we would, most people would argue that we don't take sides. Let's look what the law says, and let's look what international rules say, and that's what we should be supporting. In Canada, always claims that it's the human rights, it's on the side of human rights. But in this case here, it clearly is not on the side of human rights. It clearly is on the wrong side of international law. Even, if, for the sake of argument, and that is a debatable proposition, that Israel had a right to defend itself, given the scenario. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it was a self-defense, and even if you accept that, the way it's doing this and the excessiveness of it, the real clear targeting of hospitals, schools, UN institutions, journalists. I mean, any person who has common decency should be criticizing this, condemning this, and stopping. Just like we should be condemning what Hamas did in targeting civilians. Okay, Canada should be at the forefront of condemning these things and calling it for an end to it, calling Israel out for this. But instead, they're cheerleading. I mean, this is, to me, I didn't expect this at all. Like, as much as of a critic I was of Canadian policy on many things, I thought when it was going to come on this so black and white, when thousands of children are being basically, killed like fish in a barrel, you would think Canada would stand up and say, hey, look, international law says this, that you're not supposed to be doing this. You can't do collective punishment. These are very easy, but if I find it's hard for them to have these statements roll off their tongue. Why? Because of the lobby. They are so powerful, and they're giving into these lobbies. And this is what is shocking to me, that, you know, they can blatantly do this and without any kind of shame. You know, how do they do this without that? And that's my problem with Canada not standing up. And, you know, and even the settlement. There was a resolution in the United Nations calling that out, and Canada decides to, you know, not join in condemning it. So this is telling you that the lobby is basically running Canada, not in the best interest of Canada, but in the best interest of a foreign country. And if this was any other country, people would be, you know, speaking up and making statements. But because of the fear of being accused of being anti-Semitic, which is, nobody should be accused of that, because you're criticizing a foreign country. Just like when I criticize Saudi Arabia, I shouldn't be called an Islamophobe, right? I'm criticizing the policies of a foreign country, the wrong policies, if they're violating human rights and international law.
Yeah, it would seem really, really easy and clear-cut. But unfortunately, we are seeing the state where we're at, where we are still having ordinary people perhaps not being educated enough or being led to believe certain narratives are continuing on. And as you said, a very strong lobby which continues this narrative. Faisal, we're going to have to leave it there with you today and follow up with you again as we go. I've been speaking with Faisal Kutty, and a senior lawyer with more than 25 years of experience, and has also won numerous awards and accolades. And thank you once again for writing these op-eds and for doing the kinds of work that you have been doing.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And we still are here on unceded Coast Salish territory. We are going to be coming back shortly in discussion with Leila Farah, and Alex Neve on an op-ed that they have also written around the Canadian state and its response or non-response to what many people are calling for, a ceasefire. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We are also at www.coopradio.org and are at 100.5 FM.